to the Wandering Creatives podcast. I'm your host, Allie Poots, and joining me for today's episode is John Fitzgerald.
Hello. Hello.
John is the founder of Bonsai Bottles, which started off as kind of a pop-up terrarium shop and has now evolved into like a full-blown like business. You're like doing it all. So I'm excited to
always expanding, never contracting.
Constantly growing. Yes.
Yeah.
And I was super excited to have you on the podcast because we actually met. It was my very first market. It was mine
too, actually.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
It was like back, when was that? The end of 2019?
Was it in January? No, maybe it was December.
It was a while ago. It was a while
December of 2019, yes.
In COVID years, it's been like 10 years. It was seriously. A while ago.
Well, I also still used to work for my old job when I did that, when this was all starting it out. It feels like forever ago now.
Right? When we look back at it, I'm like, holy shit. It's like it was just probably like what, a year and a half ago? Like a year and a month or something. Like but again, in COVID years.
It's been 2 years. 2 years and no, you're right, because it was that December.
Yeah. Either way, it's been a while. We met at, I guess, both of our first markets, and we also found out that we're both murderinos, so we're both fans of the podcast. My favorite murder, which
mostly a Karen, sometimes a Georgia.
I mean, you're not wrong. Karen embodies, I feel like, the sarcastic dark soul of many.
Yeah, I'm an older soul type of person, and I feel like Georgia has the younger. And not to say it like that. Not like Karen's like the old fogey over there. I think I'm a little less open to people, I guess is more what I'm trying to say.
No,
as far as
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you, 100%. So it was pretty exciting to meet not only another murderino, but also someone who was just as like confused and nervous to be at a market as I was. So I'm glad we finally got you on the pod because I've been dying to sit down and learn more about Bonsai Bottles and how you got started and like hear about your story and your journey. So thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you. This is the first podcast I've ever been on, so this is another first.
Yay!
And I'm glad it could be with you, so it's another first with you.
That's right. Easing you into the podcast game. That's what it's about. So tell us a little bit about you, John.
So I got my first plant given to me from a musician friend, and it was a Shrek's ear jade, which are really funny looking. They literally look like Shrek's ear. And I kind of had like just this collection that I didn't even put any energy to. It just like happened. While at the same time, like getting into at that point, I was in college and I lived with a bunch of other people, like in 100 square foot apartments. They were absolutely tiny and they were so bad. I think our rent was ridiculous. It was like $250 a person for 2 bedrooms in this one. It was something that like doesn't exist anymore, but also possibly because the building doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, that's a whole other story.
But we for like violations.
Yes, actively while we were there. That's a whole other podcast.
No.
We started a community garden, and that kind of got me into learning about plants. But house plants were kind of a weird direction for me because I always looked at everything just like growing food in your yard, or I worked on a farm for a little while. So it was kind of just like plants are outside. Why would you spend the energy on trying to bring something that exists outside inside? Fast forward to like us meeting, and I was working in like a retail job, which I did partially some cooking and then partially some selling of specialty food items. And the monotony of that and the workload of that was like mind blowing. It was like mountains of just physical labor, moving things around. And then at the same time, it was like, oh, but you also need to take inventory and set up orders and like pay attention to the whole program of what's going on and what we're going to merchandise and how things should be merchandised and what you know, alternatives for that. It was like a lot. It was kind of like multiple people's worth of work being incorporated just on like, you know, one person's plate. And then it was funny because it was like an industry where it's like, well, you're supposed to be chill. And it's like, how can you be chill when you're literally just piling on the stress all the time?
You're like, I'm crumbling under the amount of shit that you're giving me right now. Like,
and I literally was. So that, and then getting out of that, and I was never a person who understood how to check in like mentally with myself. And I had this really amazing coworker who's a friend of mine, and she's a vet, not like a veterinarian. She's a military veteran. She's like this similar, she was very similar to, you know, the boss that was like a major stressor, but she had this whole check in and then deal with it and learn how to move on. Cause she was just, you know, kind of a warrior survivor type mentality. And that like was really, really helpful to me because I get some of that strength from, you know, the way I was raised, but it was like a missing piece kind of. And so that really helped me check in. And then part of my process for checking in and trying to like release the rage from just like having my fists clenched and like grinding my teeth at night all the time and being like, why am I doing this? Why is my body having these nervous reactions? To like pay more attention to what you're doing every day and how you feel when things happen. And if something feels that bad, you need to get out of there.
Yeah.
Get out.
It's hard. It's hard because sometimes you feel like, I know for me personally, when I was in a situation like that, in my mind, I was like, well, this is all I know. This is what I'm good at. I don't have any other skills. Like, how am I going to find a job? Like, this is what I've been doing. So
and there's always like kind of a carrot too of like, you need to put in the elbow grease and develop your career. It's like a carrot that they hang in front of you. And I think a lot of what burned me out was there was a lot of nepotism where I was. And I just kind of got so frustrated that I was like, I saw through it and I was done. You know, my fuse was completely burnt. And I was like, if I do this anymore, it's just going to be terrible. So I bounced. I have not done that, but I left that job. Like, and it was awkward because it was January 6th. And so I quit. And then the boss that I was under a different boss at that point, and the boss that I liked was like, "Oh, you quit? Like, do you see what's going on the TV?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't. That's completely unrelated." But
you're like, "I don't give a shit. I'm leaving. Goodbye."
Like, clearly, everything's going to crap right now, so we need to readdress. Maybe this is a good time to readdress things.
You're like, the world is ending. I'm gonna go do what I want before it happens.
Yeah. It was like, you know, I didn't really feel so essential as an essential worker, so I'm gonna view myself as an essential person on an individual level.
Something else that I don't know if it's the same for you, but like every now and then I will take a step back and I'm like, am I just being extremely selfish? Or like, is this like an extremely selfish thing to do, to kind of just be like, you know, like, fuck yeah, I'm gonna do what I want, like, bye. and I think it's because of kind of, I'm assuming we were maybe kind of raised similarly, but you're taught, you know, you work the ladder all the way to the top, and like your purpose is to like serve others essentially in your job, or whatever.
My mother's a teacher, and my dad is kind of an entrepreneur type, but he's very hard science, very engineer. So he, like, you know what I mean? I kind of had to
process based.
So it's always fun kind of navigating that. I was blaming everything on myself, like taking everything in, and then have to be like, that's not selfish, because like in nature, it's hard to consider things selfish. We are pretty much programmed to kind of follow like a mental process. So like, I don't feel like you ever see like your dogs being selfish. They do what they want to do, or they do what they need to do in that moment. So I think it's more about kind of shaping the way you live your life. Like I want to create sustainable habits that are just positive feedback loops. I want to do, if it doesn't pay back into something that benefits me, it's kind of a waste of time.
That's a good way to look at it. Positive feedback loops. I like that.
Yes, super important.
I know I personally forget that sometimes because I look at, and I don't know about you, but like I've got siblings and they've all got families and everything. And I'm like, I'm just out here like child free, doing whatever the fuck I want, spending my money however I want. And then every now and then I'll stop and I'll be like, am I being selfish for doing that? And then I'm like, I don't think so. Like,
I think there's almost like
choices.
A degree of, but also like for me, my lifestyle doesn't, because I have a partner, but so it doesn't lend us like, we built a family, but that doesn't include, biological children. We have animals, and we're actually like insane project people. It's part of where I get that drive from, is just, there's always stuff going on, and there's always like, it's not just me hoarding materials. There's also like tons of other materials just hanging out, which is, at sometimes you're like, oh, there's so much stuff. And then other times you're like, this is inspiring because things are actively happening.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
I started taking these like hikes through this trails by my house, and there's a ton of moss there. And so I'm always like researching this stuff now all the time, but there's at least like 4 out of the 5 major types of moss, 3 maybe, that you see like in the United States or pretty much all over the world. There's moss everywhere to some extent, but there's so much moss on these trails, and they are tiny little trails. And just after seeing it, I realized like seeing all the green and being out in nature was really the way that I was able to like dissolve that stress. And I had heard from someone before that there's like, they call it forest bathing in Japan.
Yeah.
And I could definitely see that, when you're surrounded by completely artificial landscape and technology, and you kind of forget like we are biological organisms, and we still have to follow suit to a lot of these natural laws that just happen. Like we aren't, for the most part, we wake up when the sun rises and we go to sleep. Some people don't, but it messes with your body if you don't sometimes, like just thinking about the people who worked 3rd shift, their circadian rhythms were all messed up. So getting back to nature, that thing, and seeing green around me. So at that point, I just started researching indoor houseplants and collecting plants. And the terrariums kind of came along as the side of that too, because I had gotten this gallon mason jar from a boss of mine who was like the major stressful boss. And that was like a fun, it was, instead of fermenting something in it or making kombucha or these things I've done before, it was like, put a plant in it, try and see if I can do something, different. How hard is that process going to be? And then how, detailed is that process going to be? And it turned out to be really detailed. And there's a lot you can do with it too.
Yeah, I love what you said about like getting back to nature. That's something that like I try to remind myself of every now and then. Like it's always on my list to like get outside more, go hiking, because you forget how much of a difference it makes. And then you go out and you spend like maybe a day outside and you're just like, oh my God. Like I know like for me personally, like I just feel so much better after like just spending the day outside. Like it's wild.
Yeah, and there's a lot of chemical and physiological things going on there too. There's more oxygen outside.
Yeah.
So your brain gets a lot better, oxygen. And then also the colors that you see outside, we react differently to that. And to see just nature is so enthralling compared to like your house could be beautiful and full of plants, but it's not going to be the same as like a big field of grass like blowing in the breeze, and it makes kind of like waves. Just the scope of nature is so much bigger than us. It really helps to like give that perspective of like, we're so consumed with ourselves, and even like thinking like, I'm geared to do these things that I want to do, but I know there's these things that I need to do. Is that selfish of me? And it's like, where's the line there? Because you're going to do something kind of in the middle regardless. You can't toe this line of perfection, I think, is psychologically unhealthy. And we are, as a society, like really realizing that. And I think in a sense, like hustle culture is very big amongst like kind of our generation.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of those things where we're like seeing impacts of that on people who are younger than us, who don't kind of remember the 90s, prior to having constant access to the internet and constant access to information and constant access to pretty much whatever you want.
Everything. Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
This episode of the Wandering Creatives podcast is sponsored by Coots Creations, branding and marketing for creatives by creatives. Coots Creations serves small businesses, entrepreneurs, and creatives throughout the country with branding, marketing, and social media management. We accomplish this by creating unique graphics, a cohesive visual brand, and content that tells your brand's story and builds trust with your customers. Visit cootscreations.com and book your free consultation today.
With the succulents, you started with that monster mason jar as your first try, I guess, or like as a terrarium. Did you get into it? Like I started doing terrariums, but I did it with air plants because like these are easy, right? Like you can literally just put them wherever and they'll do their thing. Super easy, which I was like, cool, I can handle that. Yeah. Like
air plants are so easy.
How does the mason jar, I guess, as a gift kind of play into your story or your business? Because you started collecting kind of a lot of like beer and wine bottles and started to like recycle them into terrariums. Is that right? Yeah. Was that kind of inspired by the mason jar?
I would like, maybe eventually I'll have this worked into something that's more eloquent than this, but that like I felt dead inside. Like I had gone through such a routine all the time. I felt, kind of dead inside. And I thought it was funny that they're called spirits because like I'm a huge Murakami fan. He's a Japanese author, write-up book or Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. This whole thing where like there's in some of his stories, there's like psychics who drink liquor and then can talk to the spirits. So I just always thought it was really interesting that like I was consuming all this alcohol and partially for my job, but also like selling alcohol and watching other people drink a lot of alcohol. And it was kind of like, man, this is just like, I have all these vessels and I feel dead inside. I was like, why don't I try and make it feel alive on the inside? And then I can, make myself feel alive on the inside and get away from this, just like I feeling like a husk of a person. Yeah. So it was that. And it was kind of like, I have more of a nurturing nature. And it was kind of like, because of the way I grew up, mostly with my mother. But I remember at a certain point as a kid, like wanting to be a mom, which is like so against like the binary society that we have today, which is finally now exploding. And then navigating growing up as a gay person is just, especially through the 90s when gay was synonymous with like, that sucks.
Yeah.
So it was just all these changes in language that happened. And I was like, I really got to do some like self-inventory. And if it was such a weird thing, because I've been a musician, most of my life. So I was never like a physical artist. I was used to making something that was just, in the air and it was not such a concrete thing. So that was a huge struggle for me. I've had it was such a learning process with the terrariums. But like what you said, so you came from the air plant side, which is what I predominantly see kind of like on the outside of it. And what took me to the bottle or kind of the style that I do, like the more fully enclosed ones, was one of my influences was this guy named Tanner Serpa, who's huge on YouTube. I didn't realize how big he was. Huge. I think because I had to look it up when I had to do a little research for this, even though it doesn't sound like it. And I realized, so he got on YouTube in like 2013 and now he's like, got millions and millions of subscribers. So, but what he does, he is super into vivariums and reptiles and bugs. And it's insane. He also does aquascaping. And I didn't realize how
never even heard of that.
Strongly influenced I was. So aquascaping is literally landscaping for your aquarium.
Interesting.
So people who don't, so if it's not just like the plastic pirate's chest that opens with the bubbles, people buy like sands from everywhere and they buy spider wood or they buy these different things. And then some people like cut those and super glue plants onto them. He makes these whole natural habitats for his reptiles and his fish and stuff. It's mind blowing.
Oh,
But he was really the personality who like really sucked me into it. And I didn't even realize it, but like I planted my aquarium and like did this project that was kind of outside of what I thought was terrariums. But as I do more and more research, the line between terrarium and kind of aquatic plants is blurred a little bit, because some of the plants that they use, you can use in either application, because you can make a really, really humid environment to the point where it's almost like the plant is wet. And I've also started to see some terrariums where it is an aquatic plant, like inside a glass container. So there's a little bit of like kind of, blurring of the lines between there. And so, vivariums are the term for if it has a reptile inside of it.
Oh, that's so interesting. I had no idea that there was like a whole like sub category of like
rabbit hole.
So you mentioned earlier, like you and your partner, you both do a lot of crafts and you have a lot of projects going on. And you yourself too, you have a lot going on.
I play multiple. Yeah, we have, our front room is just full of stuff. I play multiple instruments. So I've got like an accordion, a full-size keyboard that I haven't played for months, but just found the cable for. So I can probably play it some this weekend. I have a beat machine synthesizer that I also play. I used to like play in bands in high school and nothing ever. I've played in multiple different bands and then went to Boone and learned old time music, which was like a whole other trip. And for a while I was like, I want to be a musician who like doesn't use electricity, basically. And they're like, a gypsy at some point. But that music was cool, but it's such a traditional music style that the scene just kind of like kept evolving in the way that it does. And I just drifted from that when I wasn't surrounded by a really close friend who was like my magnet.
Pulling you back.
Yeah.
So do you ever feel like you have like competition when it comes to like your creativity, I guess, almost, like, oh, I want to sit down and play music, but I really also want to like do terrariums or what, like whatever project. Like, how do you keep yourself kind of like organized? Because I assume you have orders you have to fill and stuff. So is there, I guess, a second part to that question is also, do you ever feel pressure to do your craft that was once your hobby, and does it take away a little bit?
That's a huge part of what I've been navigating this past like 6 months. Because like coming out of market season, because for me, I have a shorter season just with temperatures for stuff. I don't want to freeze stuff or damage product, a problem that I'm working on creatively solving with other product lines. But there is a pressure, so I'll answer that in reverse order. There is pressure to constantly be churning out stuff because my partner has like a ridiculous work ethic. But I also think, so he's a little bit older than me, and he is a personality that like has to be always doing something kind of very ruggedly productive. Like he, for one of his passions is square body Chevys. So
interesting.
From like the generally kind of like the 80s that have like a square front on the body. So we have like roughly 6 3/4 of those trucks in the backyard, like in different various states of having been wrecked. Some of them are for parts, some of them are being actively, kind of put back together. So that's just like, that's one thing. And then he also builds a lot. So he renovated our house from what it originally was. But he's also like from a frugal background. He's from Illinois. So I think just coming from
the Midwest,
Midwest. And it really was, it's so strange because he's only like 9 years older than me, but his childhood was so different than mine. Like it was so much more simple. And then the way that he kind of, blossomed as a person was like this aggressive drive to learn everything that he could. He knows so much. It's mind-boggling. And what he does now is property maintenance, which he got to from being, when we met, he was a bartender, but he would renovate the bar like overnight, like TV show style. Like in 24 hours, I'm going to tear down this stairwell and build up a new stairwell with like all this acrylic pour. It was nuts. He went from that to electrical work to now doing property maintenance. And property maintenance is wild. Like he has to make sure the phones in the elevators work, and
interesting.
every once in a while go rescue somebody from like that one elevator in the building that isn't good, or he knows how the big HVAC systems on those giant buildings work, which are huge, which is really cool because they use moss in some of them as a filter for the heavy metals in the water that gets recycled through it in some of the coolants. They have these huge bags of what is probably sphagnum. I'm not sure what they use. It's probably sphagnum, and it picks up the heavy metals out of the water.
Oh, that's interesting. I had no idea.
Cool. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So it all ties in. It always comes back. But so he's got this drive that's always just like, there's something going on where like sometimes when I have a rest day, like after a market, I know we've talked about where you're just like, pooped. You just did like an 18-hour like marathon of like your last minute stuff on your product, and then you get all your product there and you set it, and it's like going to a festival, but it's like a 1-day event instead of like, you know, a week long of Bonner. You're just like trying to cram it into a few hours, so it's a lot. So on those days where I'm like, I'm just dead on the couch, I'm like, don't look at me like that. I earned this.
He's running around doing like everything, and you're like, I'm just gonna take a moment.
Which is nice though, because then sometimes I have to be like, you need to relax. You are stressing yourself out, and for what? Because it's only your personal agenda. It's only the pressures that he's putting on himself. So like, you got to recognize that stuff and don't run yourself so thin. And then that kind of ties back into the first one, which is, how do I like navigate my creative energies towards like being productive? And that a lot of that this year I've been looking at, I know like workflow is such a buzz term, but I look at it as like when I wake up in the morning, even if I don't have caffeine, which I normally do, I just feel so awake in the morning just as my personal metabolism type. I'm not a nap person. When I wake up, and then I have to do whatever to exhaust myself. Otherwise, like I'm kind of leaning towards a little bit more of the insomniac lifestyle where I will get in bed and just lay there and twitch and my mind will be going and I'm like, I don't even feel tired. And then if I turn on a light, I'm like, oh, my body's trying to rest so hard, but my brain isn't fully there. So they're just like making this terrible compromise of like, and I used to do that like in my old job, we would have terrible shifts where you'd have like, you know, a 6-hour window to sleep in between, you know, getting home and going back. And you're like trying to rest so hard.
Like forcing yourself to sleep.
So burnt out. So for that, like, yeah, I'm trying to focus on doing more productive, detail-oriented things in the morning and leaving later in the day when my energy is kind of starting to wane, to do something that's more creative or more relaxing as far as like playing music or doing some of my creative endeavors. And I say that, but it's, you know, we're getting there. I'm like, man, one of these days I'm going to finish all this other stuff so I can play some music, or, you know, there's like a few terrariums that I need to like shift or like redo.
I totally understand. I'm right there with you on everything you just said. I'm like, yeah, 100%. Except for the like morning person thing. No, I'm the opposite because I am an insomniac. So I'm like, oh, I can just stay awake all night and then go to sleep at like noon the next day for a while and then wake up again. That's something I'm working on. I'd like to say it's going well, but like you said,
not one size fits all. So what you really should just do is like, how do I feel? How did that make me feel when I did that? So when that like, and I have a hard time with that too, but when I can feel it when I'm like, I need to go out and get into the woods and be walking around the woods.
I think like what you were saying earlier, I'm like, yeah, I think I just need to like go out and be active and like get back into it, you know? Been inside too long.
I do have a little bit of advice there, and it's a reiteration from our Murderino, Karen and Jordan, which is when you're doing that, maybe take off your headphones, because I was walking the other day and got the total crap scared out of me by a guy who was just trying to walk by.
Yeah, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, because there's no one ever walking around here. It's like everybody's retired, and you know nobody really walks. We don't even really have very good sidewalks, but was the first time I've ever been passed by somebody, and it scared the shit out of me.
I've definitely had that happen before. And yes, like I agree. Headphones are wonderful. Maybe like one headphone in, one headphone out is a good method. Because I've had the shit scared out of me by just, they come out of nowhere.
Do you know what goes great with listening to podcasts? If you said a warm drink, you're absolutely right. Just imagine you're sitting back, you're listening to your favorite podcast, all while holding a nice, cute-ass mug in your hand with your favorite hot beverage in it. If you're wondering, where can I get a mug like that? Well, you're in luck. You can swing by the Coots Creations Cute Coffee and Tea Mugs Etsy shop. They've got everything from enamel coffee cups to travel mugs, all featuring adorable original artwork. Head over to etsy.com/shop/Coots Creations and use promo code WANDER for 10% off any mug.
So I wanted to touch on another topic that we had kind of discussed, which was kind of like finding that intersection of how success is the intersection of being prepared and taking opportunity when it comes to you. So can you kind of explain like what you mean by that intersection of preparation and opportunity?
It actually comes from a Seneca quote, who's a philosopher, but where I heard it was probably on social media. It might have been a TV show. I was trying to find where I found it so I could credit, but I have no idea where it came from. So I had to look up the quote, and the quote is actually that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But in whatever I saw it, they said that's not true. It's really that success is the intersection, because you can be lucky and have that opportunity arise, but if you're not prepared to harness that, or if you're not prepared for that situation, then it won't play out in the best way for you. But if you're prepared, like for me, what it is I am constantly like researching or compare, like it started as kind of competition, like see who else is making similar things and see what they're doing and how do I stack against that, was part of my like research and how to prepare and how to elevate my product that I'm making. But the way that I really saw that, driven home was starting to do markets and seeing the people who were clearly prepared and clearly experienced and have their stuff in containers and they have a system. And it's like that person who just like has their stuff all over the place and they're clearly having a hard time getting everything together. Like if you were going to hire someone for a job, would you want that person who's like, not put together and doesn't have their stuff organized in a way that they can access it and doesn't know what they're talking about and hasn't read, into what's going on in any way? Or would you be more likely to select somebody who is genuinely interested or has read into that and has, kind of paid attention to other people doing the same thing, or at least kind of try to work it out for yourself? Even just like doing, it sounds so crazy, but doing practices of stuff, like practicing things. Like I set up in my backyard just to see how it was going to be. There's a lot to be said for that, because it's like, especially for my personality, I'm like, I don't want to look like an idiot, but it's like, but I'd rather look like an idiot by myself in my backyard than an idiot in front of all of these other people setting up their tents. You know what I mean? So if you can practice it in whatever way and in any way, and like as much as you can. And I think that goes for, setting up the display or making the product that you make, or even like, so for this, like you're going to record more than what you're going to put out there so that you can tweak things and edit things. And maybe rearrange things, but it's always good when you're more prepared, you give yourself more room for error so that when you actually accomplish a task or set to accomplish a task, you are way more used to what could go wrong, and it makes it a much smoother process.
Yeah, a little less stressful.
Yeah, and it's weird to see that as a visual thing too, like seeing that happen within yourself and like recognizing it happening. So really, it's just whichever way you can. As far as like, I'm a very curious person, so I look into as many different aspects as I can And for me, a lot of it was, can I sell moss like legally was a big thing that was like a huge concern for me. Yeah. And I think I actually ended up talking to somebody I think I talked to her twice because I had a conversation and she used language that was very gray because of the way the law around that works is they don't want you to go out and harvest moss. From all the reading that I've done lately, it's like, it's really just not a good idea to do that for the environment. But the legality of it is if it's on your property or if it's on private property and you have that person's permission, you can take it. It's just a very interesting because it's as humans, we want to treat moss like other plants and we want it to be where we want it to be and we want it to be pretty. And moss is pretty rebellious. It doesn't really want to do that. It's kind of like a whole amazing thing that it is where it is. It took kind of a small miracle for it to be able to survive where it, is surviving. And it's even more amazing that it flourishes where it's flourishing. But then as a species, we're like, well, I want to scrape all that off and super glue it to this rock that's like in full sun and it's just going to bake and die. And we don't understand why we can't make it happy because it is actually dependent on all these, humidity and sunlight and temperature and the amount of wind. But in such a tiny little spot, all those variables are kind of all over the place. So there's a lot that comes into play using moss in that kind of realm of interior design or like as a plant. Yeah, it is magical. And then the funny other side of that, because everything is kind of very dualistic, is you could, like if I'm hiking on the trails that I hike on, I could step on some moss without even realizing it and it would get stuck in my boot and I would track it through my yard and that would just be the moss naturally, spreading itself, propagating.
Yeah.
And it's just in the nature of it.
When it comes to the preparation, the opportunity, like, do you practice? Do you have like a pitch for people when they come into your booth? Do you have like a whole like spiel that you give, or how do you prepare, I guess, to interact with potential buyers?
Yeah, it depends on who they are as an individual, because people who are into plants are usually drawn, and whether they're good with plants or not, there's always the question of like, is this easier or harder to take care of than a house plant? And typically it's easier, with the like minor exception of like cleaning the glass as maintenance. But that's actually pretty easy too. I just use like magnets and like a little piece of paper.
Oh, smart.
It's really actually smart. A reproduction of what they sell as aquarium glass cleaners, which are magnets with like felt, or they have different materials on them. But on the inside of it, it's a piece of Velcro, the hook side of Velcro that's like scratchy. Mm-hmm. And you use that to clean the algae off of the glass. So really it's like the same idea, but I just use small magnets that I've bought. But yeah, so a lot of when people walk by the booth, I'd say the major thing that I get, because people feel like obligated to look at your stuff, and they sometimes, I don't know, there's a whole dynamic there where sometimes people treat you like you're, like a traveling salesman, like vagabondish. Like yes. They almost want to communicate like this guilt that if they don't buy something, like you're gonna, have to eat rocks for dinner. So a lot of times in that circumstance, they're like, they always say, I kill every plant I buy, is like, like the statement I get the most is like, I would, but I kill everything. And it's, I
have to give a reason why they're not purchasing something.
Yeah. Which is silly. I'm like, if you like it, then that's fine. Come look at it. If you don't, keep like, it's not.
That's the opposite of what I do.
Putting yourself on display too, and I don't even know how to approach that. So I kind of just like
let my guilt everyone into buying things. I go the opposite of you. I'm like, yes, if you do not buy that $5 sticker, I will not be able to eat tonight. Guilt is what I go for.
That's probably, I could probably learn from that. I'm probably going to glean some things from you.
Like, please buy my plants.
I might need some stickers soon. So
hey, I need to eat. So let me know.
That's weird for me because my dad for a while was a salesman, like a corporate salesman, but he also is the same style where he just knows the ins and outs. And then beyond that, he just uses that to navigate that situation. So if people are curious, I do like to engage. And something that has really benefited me has just been the word of mouth, just engaging with people to get the exposure. because not having a brick and mortar, I don't get like daily exposure. I don't get walk-bys. I don't get a lot of that. So I have to rely on word of mouth and digital marketing, but they tie in, because if somebody hears about you, the only way they're going to be able to see you if you don't have a physical presence is to be able to look at your online presence.
Yeah.
So that was a huge, and I didn't even realize I was putting so much work into that online presence until I had like kind of this little base step that now I'm like, oh, I got to go back into doing that. Like I was spending so much time doing that and not even realizing that it was actively working. Like you can literally be on Instagram and be working, which is so strange.
It's all I do now.
Well, and within like our mindset of like, I need to be working, but then you're like, I'm on Instagram, but that is actually,
I am working.
creating more exposure for, at least for me in that circumstance. I'm creating more of a catalog, more of a existence online for people to see what I'm making.
That's what I try to, guilt is my go-to emotion, but like I also feel like, because I do social media management, I will sometimes be like out with friends or something, and I'll be on my phone, I'll be on Instagram, and I'm like, I'm not ignoring you. I'm literally working right now. Like I've got a client who like we posted, I got to do some engagement. Like I'm working, I promise. Like I'm not constantly on Instagram just for shits and giggles.
You have to give me 15 minutes to write the caption on this, because it's important, because I don't want it to have like a typo in it, because it's
exactly. I'm like, I'm working, I swear.
Yeah, I love that.
The struggle. So something I do with my booth, which I actually think maybe works against me, because like you were saying, you kind of get a feel for people when they come in and you're like, should I like engage with this person, or should I just let them like browse in silence? And as an extremely socially awkward individual, my go-to is to give them an awkward smile and say, hello, welcome to my booth. And then I go into some long spiel about my stickers and whatever, and people are like, cool, and then like wander off. And I'm like, I've just scared you away with my social awkwardness.
So I guess you're making me realize that a lot of where my store presence, my market presence derives from is for like 2 or 3 years, I spent learning how to cut cheese at my old job, like fancy cheeses, and just stood behind a huge case full of fancy cheeses and like cut them all day with like a wire. And like from that experience, it was like, you always need to say hi. Like greeting somebody, I feel like is just, for one, hugely in my nature. I want to like acknowledge everybody and acknowledge everybody equally and just be approachable. But it's also weird because it's like, you can only work with what you're given to work with. Yeah. So it's like, I'll do that opening engagement, and then I just kind of like, this is what it is. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, which is kind of just, at markets, it's like chilling. But in that sense, I would be like, actively working. I don't want to seem too eager, because then people kind of come off. I've literally had somebody like, I don't know if they apologized, but they were like, God bless your business, when they left. And I'm not a very religious person, and it just made my head spin. I was like, I don't understand what just happened.
I had the same thing happen. I had an older lady come up to me, look at my art, and she goes, I don't get it. I go, that's all right. That's what art's about, man. Like, some people like it, some people don't.
That's your version of the I kill everything.
Yeah.
Is the I don't get it.
I wish it stopped there, though. It went on for like 30 plus minutes of her just looking through all of my artwork and telling me why she didn't like it.
No, you can.
And I was like,
you can tell people to carry on away from your.
I was like, cool. I was like, thank you for the feedback. I was like, that's the point of art. It's subjective. Like, you may not see because one of them was like a space thing. She's like, we don't even know what space really looks like. I was like, well, a NASA does.
What? Oh, what?
But it was like one of the most awkward, and because she was just like an old lady, like most awkward interactions I've ever had in my life. And then she got to talking about who she was, where she was from. Turned out she's also from Nebraska, and I was like, oh Jesus, this is me in like 50 years. But it was like such a weird interaction. I was like, oh, thank you.
You're like, somebody could copy these NFTs and sell them without the blockchain.
And then when she left, she said, God bless you. And I was like, me too. Yeah, there's awkward interaction. I actually started, I would say catcalling, but it's not the right word. But I started just berating people when they would walk by my booth. Like if they had something that I thought would like vibe well with what I had. So like anytime I see somebody with like an Nalgene or a water bottle with stickers on it, I'll be like, hey, a water bottle needs another sticker. It's just like yell at people. And it works sometimes. Like this lady's walking by with like cats on her shirt. And I'm like, yo, you like cats? I got cat stickers.
There's definitely a time and a place for like the carnival barker style. Yeah. And you can feel that energy too, though. I would say like the later, like an evening market sometimes too, there's a completely different energy where the brunch markets. Yeah. Oh, no.
No. The vibe is different at a brunch market for sure.
Oh, that's good to know.
I don't do well at brunch markets. I do good at night markets. Once I've got some booze in them and they're like, oh, there's a sticker. I'm like, yeah, come on in.
Yeah. I think that is very helpful.
Oh, my Lord. When it comes to other like makers or crafters, do you have any kind of words of advice when it comes to being able to be prepared to jump on opportunities, or any advice or encouragement in general for other craft folks?
Yeah. So just along the lines of, we already hit on like practicing and preparation. Like also a big thing that I've kind of hit on was try to get perspective, because you are just always, your face is like, an inch away from what you're doing all the time. And for me, literally, because I'm trying to make tiny details and stuff, or working on something that's like really small, but then taking the time to like set that down and do something else, and then come back to it and look at it with fresh eyes, and even try and sometimes get other people's perspective just to like get more feel for it. Like, does that look as good as I felt like it looked? Do I need to tweak it in one way or the other? But then another thing, I guess like a little nugget of wisdom that I have that I didn't touch on so far, maybe a tiny bit, is like instead of looking at other people as competition, I try to diversify. I try to cross merchandise if I can. So like if I'm at a market, one of the things I like to do is if I see somebody else's product that I can use in my merchandising, like on my display, I'll kind of pick up those and then pick up one of their cards and then put that onto my display with one of my products. Like there was a lady and I kind of repurposed her like soup spoon, or not soup spoon, like a spatula holder. Like if you were, what is that called? A spoon drip?
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's like a ceramic little dish with a lid mostly around it.
Yeah, I don't know what those are called.
I don't know what those are called either, but they were really pretty. And she was selling them. And I was like, this is super cool. So I bought one and put a kokedama, those moss balls that I make with the plants in them, on that. And I've actually I contacted an old coworker who does ceramics for they're like called drip trays, but it would basically just be like a decorative tray to display kokedama in them. And he done some really cool stuff with like floral prints or like leaf print on the texture of the ceramic dish.
Interesting.
That's the Moscow. Yeah. Everything always snowballs, but that's why it's always a good idea to kind of always look at other people less as competition and more of an opportunity to try to diversify your business. Because like we can't all go to the market and sell vintage clothes and repurpose records. Like if everybody set up at the market with the same stuff, it would be really whack. But the thing is, if there's so many creative people, it's like, why not try and diversify your product and make it more cohesive? And I think that is my strategy towards trying to exist longer as a business, trying to have lifespan and keep things rolling.
So smart.
This episode of the Wandering Creatives podcast is sponsored by Coots Creations, branding and marketing for creatives by creatives. Coots Creations serves small businesses, entrepreneurs, and creatives throughout the country with branding, marketing, and social media management. We accomplish this by creating unique graphics, a cohesive visual brand, and content that tells your brand's story and builds trust with your customers. Visit cootscreations.com and book your free consultation today.
I'm actually going to have John back on for another episode of the podcast where we're going to talk about creative problem solving, like how you can, problem solve for your small business. And then we're going to talk about like trial and error for creatives and what that means and like what failure, quote unquote, means and what it's like
to give a little highlight in that.
Absolutely.
For my trial and errors, one of my biggest errors, I recently discovered why. I recently learned that there's a species of moss that smells like poop as a reproductive strategy. So that's a fun little tidbit that you can come back next time for my next episode that we can talk about how I learned about the shitty moss.
I'm making a note because I got to ask you about the poop moss.
Oh yeah.
So that's going to be a highlight for me. I cannot wait to hear about that. So John is definitely going to be back so we can dig into kind of more of the, I don't want to say business side of it, but maybe more like almost the mental side of being a small business owner a little bit. Like, right? We're going to dive into it. But is there anything, did you have any cool projects that you're working on right now that you'd like to share or anything?
Yeah. Always.
You're like,
I had one that's in progress where I've had something 3D printed and I got that, but what I'm working on right now is I'm going to make a mold of that so that I can make concrete casts in the very specific shape, but I don't want to give away all the details of it. So I had something very cool, pretty 3D printed so that I can order. Right now I'm in the process of ordering a large amount of silicone to make this mold with. And it's a big endeavor that's kind of like branching out from what my main stuff is, but it's along the lines of, on my Instagram, I've got the hypertufa projects, which are the concrete that's like really porous and really light. It's kind of in that realm. It's in that little corner of my projects. And then the other project that got started yesterday because I found containers is a Serpa design project. And I know it's not good to do visual things on podcasts, but so it's just like, there's a word for these. Marie Kondo little boxes. They're like little pleasure boxes. It doesn't even have a lid. But so there's a design from Serpa Designs where he makes a self-watering moss wall. And like I'm pretty sure this is, if not the same, like really similar to the container he used for his. So
self-watering moss wall?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's going to have a little like aquarium pump or like a little fountain pump in the bottom of it. And then there's like some guts. There's some filter sponge like for aquarium. It's a lot more aquarium stuff, but it's being incorporated into this design to where it makes a moss wall. And if I'm lucky, I'll find a light that'll work out for it so it can be lit as well.
I don't know if my brain is just broken, but like I never associated like terrarium stuff with aquariums before, like as much as like, and then listening to you talk, I'm like, whoa, they're really kind of like,
there's a lot of
related.
Overlap.
Yeah.
Even the tools that I use are aquarium tools is what they're sold as.
Wow.
But then you can use them. I feel like I've seen people use them for other stuff too, because they're very useful for small applications. Like it's really long tweezers that are really small at the end, and then some with a bend. And then I have 2 different pairs of scissors that are like the same. So
I use my old terrarium tools to do resin art now. Because they are, like you said, they're like really thin, like fine tweezers, and I can pick up like all the little things and like do resin art and like they're like when I first started doing like playing with resin, I was like, how the hell? I got stumpy little fingers. How am I supposed to like work with all this small shit? I was like, what am I supposed to be doing? And then I was like, oh wait, terrarium stuff, and I went and I dug it out and I was like, yes, I can use these. So They're good tools. You can use them for a lot of different stuff, including resin art. So you mentioned you've got some new projects going on. Where can folks follow along with what you're working on?
Instagram. I've slowed down. I used to post voraciously, but I've slowed down to kind of regroup and I'm kind of navigating this branding, like trying to make my Instagram maybe have more of a cohesive brand and look more. I think I actually got that from your like third or fourth episode, the Etsy person, maybe. I forget her name at the moment, but making the Instagram look more like my booth setup would look. Like when you see the products, they would be displayed in the same way. So I've slowed down on the posting because I used to post everything, but there still will be, I like to do tutorial stuff and I like to do progression stuff as well to show my process, because I think it's really simple until I start talking with somebody about it. And there's a lot like people, I like aquascaping. It's huge. I didn't even realize that was such a big thing.
No idea what it was until you just told me.
Or the rabbit hole. It's just all encompassing.
Those are some of my favorite videos too, though, that you share, like the progress ones, or like this when you speed them up and you get to see like the entire, just watch someone build something. I don't know. Those are the ones I enjoy the most, kind of like the behind the scenes.
I think those do really well too. So Instagram is my main place where you can find me, but I'm also on like Google. I'm fixing a Google profile right now for my business, but Gmail is also where you can find me at bonsaibottles@gmail.com. Instagram is probably the easiest place to find me, though. I'm constantly checking that.
Doing business.
Exactly.
And your Instagram is also Bonsai Bottles, right?
Yes, correct. Perfect. With no spaces.
And of course, I will include links and information to John's profiles and his website so that you can find him on the interwebs. Highly recommend checking out his Instagram because he does post like a lot of really cool videos, and also you get a little greenery in your life. You get to see some beautiful plants. So
and one last plug. I will probably be at the Ralston Blooms event at the Arboretum, the JC Ralston Arboretum in Raleigh, and that's going to be on April 30th.
John, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to having you on again, and can't wait for our next episode because we'll get into the nitty gritty of the creative mind. And listeners, of course, thank you for tuning into today's episode. If you have questions or comments for me or for any of my guests, including John, you can text or call us on our hotline, 252-419-6004, and we will answer your questions on a future episode of the podcast. Be sure to like, rate, and review the podcast. And you can also follow us on Instagram at wandering_creative_ or visit our website, cootscreations.com.
This has been a Coots Creations production. Follow the show on Instagram at wandering_creative_ and on Twitter at wandering_pod. For more information, go to cootscreations.com. Like, rate, review, and subscribe. To sponsor the Wandering Creatives podcast, visit www.cootscreations.com/podcast-sponsorship-opportunities. You can also click the link in the episode description below. To be a guest or a featured maker on the podcast, click the link in our Instagram bio or contact us at cootscreationsllc@gmail.com.